Welcome to Travel Buddy, presented by Switchfly. In this podcast, we talk about all things travel, rewards, and loyalty. Let's get to it.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Travel Buddy by Switchfly. This is episode 27, and today we are joined by Ian and Ashley. How are we doing today, guys?
Hey, Rachel, doing good.
So today we're going to be talking a little bit about employee retention strategies and how travel rewards can really help your rewards and recognition program. So to kind of dive into this, let's do a quick overview of some of the challenges that the HR world is facing with employee retention. Ashley, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I found it really interesting, and this is top of mind coming from Loyalty Expo last week. One of the main topics of conversation was how there's really high turnover rates. And so when you think about that corporate loyalty and their challenges in employee retention, apparently unemployment is at an all-time low. It's at a 50-year low, which is amazing on one hand, but it presents a challenge in the corporate retention space, so in a very competitive job market. So that was one of the hot topics coming up Loyalty Expo. So this is very timely, this podcast and our topic of discussion today.
I think it might be worth getting into what is employee engagement, right? Essentially, I think I was reading earlier that 32% of U.S. employees feel engaged at work, right? So they are actively involved in their steps at work. And what that can look like is spending a few less minutes during a break, rushing back instead of checking their Twitter or email first thing back at the computer. They're diving back into the project they're working on. It can be a little hard to define sometimes, and often it's just the employee themselves identifying themselves as engaged or not. Disengaged employees can be very damaging. The same report I was reading earlier discussed that an estimated roughly $2 trillion of productivity is lost in the US every year to disengaged employees. There's a few different types of disengagement. The first is sort of the, I think, quote unquote, not engaged. So they're not actively disengaged, meaning they're not searching for other jobs actively. They're not spreading negative energy throughout the work culture at the company. And that's usually a pretty low percent that are actively disengaged, around 16%. So between that 33 or 32 and 16% are the sort of not engaged. So they're the ones who take a few extra minutes at break. They're checking social media, checking in with their friends a little more often than they might otherwise. So I think just kind of might be helpful to put some definitions around engagement.
Yeah, definitely. When we think about the idea of employee engagement and employee retention, I think we also have to think about the counterpart of HR leaders. Some of the recent stats that we've seen are around 86% of HR leaders are saying that career paths for their employees are unclear within the organization, which is super interesting when you compare that to the idea of employee disengagement or individuals who are, there was the idea of quiet quitting a couple of years back. But it is interesting when you put those two statistics next to each other to see that there is such a high volume of HR leaders saying that their career paths for their employees are unclear. And then you also see the other side of it, which is as an employee, that disengagement or that lack of fulfillment from the company or the organization that you're working with.
That's a great point, Rachel. One other thing to add to that is the most often people are either not engaged or actively disengaged. One is the kind of undefined career path, but the most common is people don't actually know what's expected of them currently. Right. And I think it's a bit of a catch-22 in that, especially post-COVID, when we saw kind of the peak of employee engagement, there's been quite a big productivity burst in the US, definitely compared to the rest of the world, between 2021 and 2024. Companies are expanding, they're growing. We had such low unemployment rates, but often that means people are getting either promoted into jobs that they're not quite ready for, or new employees are being brought in without somebody to fully train them. There's a lot of things that go into it. And some of those things are secondary effects of company growth. If your company is growing, can be easy to lose track of making sure people are trained properly, making sure they know what to be working on. So you might think, oh, everything's going great, we're growing, but really you're going to start seeing dips in your employees being engaged unless you are keeping it at the top of your mind and making sure that you're kind of touching base with them.
Great point. One of the other things that we've talked about internally is leading to employee expectations and the current state of the state when it comes to the job market. So, going back to Ashley, your commentary regarding unemployment being at an all-time low, that's also paired with pretty high turnover rates. So the job market is definitely facing a little bit of uncertainty. And when you pair that with the economic uncertainty that is existing in 2025, it's leading to, even if your company experienced fast growth a couple of years ago, you're now facing this potential for, we've seen a lot of layoffs, we've seen a lot of voluntary attrition that go hand in hand with this idea of employee engagement and the disengagement that we've talked about, but also the topic that we're here to cover today of retention. So when we think about the economic standpoint of a lot of organizations paired with employees shifting expectations for flexibility and career growth and some meaningful benefits, what are some things that you are seeing as solutions for the challenges that the world is facing today?
Definitely. I mean, I think there's been a movement, just as you mentioned earlier, the movement of quiet quitting. I think employers really need to listen to their employees and what are they seeking? Obviously, everyone has a job for different reasons, whether that maybe it's financial security, they're getting fulfillment, they want to achieve some level of autonomy. And I think the key to a strategic engagement program or retention is really listening to your employees. What are your employees looking for? Is it rewards that allow them to be more flexible with their working environment? Is that a remote working environment? Is that resources that allow them with their time off to do the things that they truly want to do? Is it more to that fulfillment aspect? I think that goes hand in hand with the engagement, making sure that they have a clear, aligned career path, that they feel that they can bring their skill set to the table and they're making a difference within their organization. So there's a lot of different strategies to achieve this. One, obviously, here at Switchfly, when we more align on the travel reward side, where you can really engage your employee base by giving them rewards that they actually want and allowing to give them that autonomy to, on their time off, do the things that they want to do. So I think, we've been the forefront of really listening to employees and creating a product that gives them what they really want.
I think this probably 5 to 8 year stretch between say 2019 and 2026, 2027 is going to be a gold mine for research on employee statistics. Just the wild extremes we've seen during and post-COVID. Now, like Rachel mentioned, there's a little bit more economic uncertainty. It's a very strange moment because it's still in the future, right? The impacts of some of the things going on in the world haven't totally bitten yet. And so there's still a bit of a holding their breath moment that you're starting to see with some of the jobs reports coming out and some of the economic indicators coming out, but really only just the very tip of it. I am curious, 10 years from now, sociologists and psychologists are going to be just kind of mining this time frame for a lot of these because at peak COVID, I kind of brushed on it earlier, but you saw the highest employee engagement statistics we've seen in a long time. I think, honestly, since they really started tracking that metric. And it seems a little counterintuitive, right? We're in the middle of a global pandemic. A lot of people were getting laid off. A lot of people were having to really adjust their work habits and schedules and whatnot. But that's been one of the more kind of fascinating things that have gone on for the past few years. And to kind of piggyback on that, the rise of remote work culture, because we saw this explosion in remote and hybrid work during and after the pandemic. And that has then faced something of a backlash, right? And now we're kind of getting a backlash to the backlash, where so many of those companies that were forced to have their employees work remotely were super skeptical of it while it was going on, forced their employees to come back in, but then realized they did get a lot of benefits out of it, right? So now I think we're starting to kind of zero in what this kind of remote work hybrid life is going to look like. And honestly, the best engaged employees, the most engagement, are coming out of the people who work remotely. They're at 10, 12% higher than employees forced to work in an office, and hybrid is kind of somewhere right in the middle. So it is still a fascinating time for employee statistics all around. That said, it's not always the most fun to live in very fascinating and interesting times, right? But that uncertainty can cause a lot of issues. So I think Ashley's absolutely right of connecting with your employees, figuring out what their wants, their needs, their passions, desires are, both in and out of the office, and then doing everything you can do to kind of within your power to mold your company to what the employees want. There's a term in the military that's used a lot called servant leadership, right? And the idea of being a servant leader is that, your employees aren't there to make you better. You're there to make them better, right? And by doing that, everybody gets better. The more you can engage with your employees, the more you can give them the kinds of recognition, the kinds of rewards, all of that stuff that they need, the training, the feedback. Unfortunately, we can't say, do this tomorrow and all of your employees are going to be engaged, right? It is a holistic strategy, and travel has shown to be a major portion of that, and definitely somewhere that we feel we can contribute very positively to the space. But it really is a holistic culture at your company.
Yeah, it's especially coming from the perspective of an employee. We are all employees at Switchfly as well. So I know we see both sides of it, or really all three sides of it from the third party perspective. As far as retention strategies go, we've talked about career growth, how your rewards and recognition programs, you can offer more benefits. We've touched on the work-life balance aspect and that idea of hybrid work over the last couple of years as post-pandemic life has changed. The interesting thing that I'm seeing with that in particular is that remote work is now being seen as a benefit and lesser so as a requirement from that pandemic lifestyle. And with the RTO orders that are coming through, we're really seeing a surge in individuals moving towards freelance or entrepreneurial opportunities solely because they are really looking for that freedom and the connection with their organizations that they're working for and with. So knowing all of that, and knowing as well, Ashley, maybe this will be a good topic for you to touch on, that since employee expectations have changed for that flexibility and wanting to be able to really capitalize on their time outside of the office, why don't we talk a little bit about the surge in wellness tourism and how it comes into play here?
Absolutely. My favorite topic. So wellness tourism is definitely a growing trend in corporate benefit. Similar to reward and recognition is compensation beyond salary. And we believe here at Switchfly, and I do personally as well, that travel and wellness go hand in hand. It's that regeneration, rejuvenation, that R&R that you can get outside the office, but also in the office as well. When you think about what motivates you and what you look forward to, you could be looking forward to a trip, or you looking forward to maybe wellness can also, there's physical aspects of that as well. Maybe you're looking forward to even that workout after work, right? A wellness benefit is potentially a company subsidizing a gym membership for you, right? Something that mentally, physically helps your well-being. As we've discussed, employees value experiences over traditional material things. So that's where wellness benefits really come to play, and travel is at the forefront of that wellness ecosystem.
That's great. One of the other things that we typically talk about when we think about wellness tourism and how it comes into play with your employees is this idea of employee branding. So your employer branding, and why companies would potentially want to invest in adding travel benefits to their systems. Do we want to touch a little bit more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. From a revenue perspective, how travel can be a job. Not only is it a great benefit for an employee, but also for the employer and can drive revenue for the company. So a mutually win-win for both an employee and an employer. So not only giving your employee what they want, what they're looking for, but also driving revenue for the company itself through travel bookings.
Yeah. So what do we see as the future of employee retention and engagement? What are some of the trends that, Ian, you mentioned this time frame really through 2027 is in flux, but what are we seeing as what is currently in place versus what we should expect over the next 3 to 5 years?
So I think that's a little up in the air at the moment. I do think that, I mean, I know we keep coming to it. Travel, when I started at Switchfly 3+ years ago, I could hardly find statistics regarding travel in the employee reward space. It was definitely very new. People had always thought of it in the customer loyalty aspect, but never really in the employee rewards space. Since we've gotten engaged with some of the bigger PEOs and HR tech brands, we've seen this explosion not only at Switchfly, but just kind of across the industry. The travel is clearly trending. I don't see that tapering off at all. I think trying to find smarter ways to engage employees is going to be very important for employers over the next few years. I think, especially with a lot of the new tools at our disposal technologically, we can come to some of those conclusions a little faster than before and maybe be able to spotlight as employees go from engaged to disengaged back to engaged, because it's not a set in stone thing, right? We can begin to track what changes are occurring in the company that is causing some of that bouncing between engagement and disengagement. So there, I believe, will be a kind of heightened focus on it. Is it solely money, right? Are people feeling underpaid? That's always a major reason for disengagement, but not the only reason by any means, and not even the most common one often. Things like rewards, like recognition, training, I mean, everything goes into it. So I think the trend will be a heightened focus on the types of things that do make employees either engaged or disengaged, and the ability to actually really dive in at almost real time to figure out what a company can do to make those changes.
Yeah, I think we're dancing around the idea of it, talking about technology, but specifically what I think you're referring to is the use of AI. And we wouldn't be talking about the future if we didn't bring up the use of AI in platforms. Do we want to chat a little bit more about that?
Yeah, Ian, you blew my mind when you said that stat that it was, what, 2 trillion loss from disengaged?
Yeah, yearly.
I think that is so fascinating to me, but I also think employers should also be wary. There's another side of this. So with the rise of productivity tools and, of course, AI, if now employees can achieve, let's say, what would take them 8 hours of work and maybe 5 hours of work. So that additional 3 hours, how are we classifying that? Is that time that we're giving back to our employees now that we have efficient and productive tools? Or is that time that we're saying, okay, well, they should just be doing more? How does that factor in the work-life balance of we're expecting more because we have these amazing productivity tools that make work more efficient? But I do also think, where is that balance of the expectation now of how we evaluate these tools in the workplace and the real expectation of productivity? So I think there's another side of that as well, of these amazing role of technology tools and how they play, and also the effects. As Ian, as you said, there'll be a lot of research coming out of this time of productivity, but also the mental effects of that as well.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, Ashley. It's one that we've seen kind of over and over historically. Rachel and Ashley are keenly aware of my historical nerdiness and how much I love little weird anecdotes. When the cotton gin was first invented and introduced, Eli Whitney thought that it would give employees more time for themselves, right? They could be more productive and finish work earlier, and that it would really bring, this is centuries before the idea of work-life balance, but that's kind of what he was driving at, that it would be better for the employees, when in fact, all it did is mean they could work more land in the same time. Right. So Ashley, that's a great point of, if I can do in 5 hours what would take me 8, even a year, 2 years ago, what do I do? And it's something that every company is going to have to tackle kind of individually, right? Is that going to drive salaries down because maybe the employer only expects you to work those 5 hours? Is it going to increase your workload? These are all questions that are still yet to be answered, and there is probably no single answer to any of it. So I think it's probably something either company by company and sometimes even employee by employee, companies are going to have to kind of figure out. And if they're not figuring it out, if I complete my work in 5 hours, yet still have to stick around the office for 8, and say you're already not that engaged or in kind of that bubble zone, that sort of lost productivity number is just going to go up, right? Instead of down, which I think AI tools really are supposed to help is us be more productive. But there's a lot of ways to kind of get around and be unproductive using it. So yeah, it's interesting and really fun if you're a kind of math nerd and statistics nerd like me.
Yeah. And to your point regarding how employees are utilizing AI, there is also the other side of it where when we think about the idea of retention and employee engagement, you can utilize these tools to help provide a more personalized experience. Yes, you may be offering travel rewards to every single one of your employees as a benefit, but now it also can feel tailored to them because of these tools. So while there is this idea of AI coming in to help cut down on the manual labor that is going into their day-to-day and maybe increase productivity from that aspect, you also have the opportunity to utilize these tools to increase productivity and engagement even further by offering more personalized benefits for them.
That's a great point, Rachel. It's not something I necessarily thought of, but Ashley was talking about earlier with wellness travel. Report after report I read talks about the health benefits, especially the mental health benefits of travel. Something as simple as a 3-day weekend getaway can have a extremely impactful lift for employees of just unplugging, getting out of the office and not thinking about anything but being on the beach for 3 days. With some AI tools in HR tech, being able, if you're in a big organization and you're not necessarily keeping track of what everybody's doing on their downtime, being able to highlight those employees and be like, give them a nudge of, hey, when's the last time you left? I mean, we all work at home. There are times where I barely leave the house for weeks on end, being able to kind of check in with those employees and say like, extra rewards, here's a plane ticket, here's some movie tickets, whatever. Get out of the house, go unplug your brain, go do something else, right? And I think that'll be very helpful for employers.
Any final thoughts on employee retention, engagement, strategies for employers to be able to really tap into their workforce?
Yeah, I think when done right, companies have to invest in employee satisfaction. I think that leads a stat that the employee satisfaction leads to a 10 to 20 increase in productivity. I think one of the best strategies to do that is one, obviously listening to your employees and seeing really what they're looking for in their engagement. As we noted, this can change from employee to employee. Obviously, this changes from company to company. One of the, I think, most effective ways to engage employers is with travel rewards. As Ian said, even just a 3-day long extended weekend vacation. I think the beauty of travel is that there is the excitement of looking forward to a trip. There's the actual trip. And then the post-trip reflection of getting to tell your friends, your coworkers about the trip and memories that you'll have for a lifetime, whether it's travel or when you think about how you're designing your engagement strategy is listening to your employees, but what do they want and what is something that's going to fulfill their needs, not just in the moment, but long term.
Yeah, definitely. I think just the focus on understanding your employees. It seems like there's more of a focus over the past couple years, maybe a couple decades of these generation gaps of the sort of cultural mindset between the different generations. And one thing that's abundantly clear is millennials and especially Gen Z value travel, value work-life balance so much more than previous generations, right? To the point where they're taking reduced salaries, which is not something we've ever really seen. You know, people almost always historically have, when you have the opportunity, you take a higher salary at the expense of virtually any other benefit. But that's starting to shift, right? And people are taking lower salaries for companies that offer them the work life that they expect, right? Whether it's working remotely or extended vacation, unlimited vacation time or whatever that may be. So recognizing your workforce and what kinds of things motivate them, money and travel and recognition, those are always big three ones. So Switchfly is definitely well positioned, I think.
Well, Ian, Ashley, thank you so much for joining me today. Join us next time for episode 28, and I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks for having us, Rachel.